Good afternoon, Krista Nimzik with the California Partnership to End Domestic Violence. Just want to really echo all of the comments of the witnesses that have come before about how important this is, and really want to thank you, Ms. Sawyer, for sharing your story. We know that, unfortunately, your story is not unique, that so many survivors of domestic violence find themselves in this exact situation and impacted by the maximum family grant rule. And so we are very pleased to see this come before the committee and urge you to move forward with the repeal.
Thank you. Next witness.
Good afternoon, John Bowders, Policy Director at Housing California. I wanted to just say a couple brief things. First, we're pleased to join Western Center and the other supporters in the repeal of the MFG. Homelessness and homelessness is up because housing costs are up. And so anytime you create a greater, economic gap between a person and the ability to attain housing, homelessness is going to continue to rise, which we've seen inside the CalWorks program this past couple of years. I'm curious, one of the speakers talked about, when there's little economic opportunity and there are impediments to obtaining jobs, people need things to fill their time, and so they have children. And I'm just curious whether there's any empirical data that actually shows that. I didn't hear the speaker say that, so this is just a question I have, not being an expert on this. And there's a lot of people behind me who are the experts on child welfare, and so I'll just say that the one thing I would like to add is that this is human services, and so this is about people, and people should be the first and foremost priority here, and so this should be about the dignity of people, and I think this is an undignified policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next witness, please.
Libby Sanchez on behalf of Laborers Local 777 and 792, two of the 100 organizations who are in support of repeal of the MFG rule. Thank you for your leadership on this. Thank you to Western Center and CWDA for their championing this important cause. And Noah and Sasha were too shy to say they support it as well, but.
Next witness, please.
That's good because I couldn't follow them. Kathy Mossberg, representing the California Association of Food Banks, California Family Health Council, and the California Food Policy Advocates, 3 of the 100 organizations, urging you to repeal the MFG policy.
Thank you so much. Next witness.
Rebecca Gonzalez, National Association of Social Workers, California chapter, another one of the many organizations supporting the repeal of the MFG.
Thank you. Next witness.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair Member. Martha Guerrero, representing the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors, and we are in definite support of repealing the MFG rule for all the reasons that you've heard. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Dennis Garcia on behalf of the California Latinas for Reproductive Justice, one of the co-sponsors, very supportive of repealing the MFG rule. This is, just perpetuates a cycle of poverty, and we want to make sure we can end that. Thank you.
Nicole Wertelman on behalf of the Alameda County Board of Supervisors and Ventura County Board of Supervisors. In Alameda County, we have about 4,000 children and their families who are impacted by the MFG rule, keeping them in poverty for longer than is necessary.
Thank you.
Hi, Luann Nguyen with the East Bay Community Law Center. We're one of the co-sponsors of the bill that you have so graciously supported all these years. I think that there was a gentleman here earlier who was talking about SSI, and he said that we need to give money to the young, starting from when they are born. And the problem with this policy is that it smacks against that, and in fact, it intentionally does not do that. I believe that the name of the game for government is about opportunities, whether it's the GI Bill, whether it's education and Cal grants, whether it's the UC system and what we provide in subsidized benefits to people who are going to school. We need to give opportunities to people so that people can achieve their full potential. And the problem is when we're spending $9,000 in education, which is completely right, and we should spend more, but we're not spending any money to keep kids' house, and we're not spending any money to keep the utilities on. They can't read, they can't write, they can't learn, they don't have access to transportation to go to the doctors, and the basic needs is a reasonable ask to make, and to deny that is unconscionable. And for that reason, the MFG rule should be repealed. Thank you.
Thank you. Bless you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Maricela Munoz. My kids are subject to the MFG rule. I'm a single mother of 4 children living on the bedroom. And I'm here to I come from Hayward, and I'm here to ask you guys to reappeal the MFG rule so we can keep moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, little one. Thank you to the panel again for your presentation. And we'll move on. Thank you. The next item, and again, we'll be holding that item open, is housing support. We will welcome Mr. John Bowders, Policy Director on Homelessness, Housing California, and Mr. Mecca, who will remain in his seat. Welfare Directors Association. Would you like to start?
Based on my age, I will take the prerogative
Fair
of going
enough.
first. Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Monning, you've already heard that poverty is debilitating to children. Homelessness among children is that much more debilitating. We know from the research that the impact on child's brain development and their prospects for escaping poverty are significantly diminished. We've got a significant homelessness problem in the CalWORKs program. The homelessness among CalWORKs families is dangerously high, and it's increasing despite the economic recovery. You've heard the statistic from Los Angeles County since 2006. They've seen a 188% increase in the number of homeless families on their CalWORKs rolls. When you take into account the overall decline in the CalWORKs population, the number of homeless families is growing at a rate about 13 times the rest of the caseload. Each month, 8,400 children every month in California and their parents apply for what is a pretty limited homeless assistance benefit now, which is essentially for most of these families a couple weeks in vouchers for a motel. Low grants, stagnant wages, and skyrocketing rents have created a homelessness epidemic in this program. And it's a problem that the CalWORKs program never anticipated and hasn't been designed to address. And homelessness among CalWORKs families is undermining the goals of the program. When families don't know where they're going to sleep at night, it's virtually impossible to stay in your work program or stay employed. So we are very pleased that the legislature and the governor showed foresight and responsiveness to this program in creating the housing support program, and my colleague will talk a little bit more about the program and our request of the legislature.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you. We're very pleased to be co-sponsoring this augmentation request with the County Welfare Directors Association of California. For decades, the state has been making investments in solutions that are bundled together and compartmentalized for policy and funding reasons into silos. And those better reflect the needs of state agencies and departments than they do the people who benefit from them. And people who live in dire poverty and experience homelessness every day need to be able to access solutions that better reflect the services they deserve. Social and human services workers have long assisted the same clients as housing and homelessness advocates, but we have done so independent of one another, requiring our clients to seek us out independent of each other in order to get comprehensive assistance that's often needed to combat poverty successfully. As Mr. Mecca has already noted, CalWORKs never anticipated a need to address housing or homelessness among its participants when the program was designed. The truth, however, is that housing and homeless prevention services are not just one of the most underutilized services, but perhaps the most important anti-poverty tool that advocates in all sectors should have available to them when looking for solutions to poverty. Many people need education in the course of combating poverty. Some of them need employment and job training. Some of them need childcare. Others need mental health services, and even more need substance abuse training and counseling. A good number of those people need all of those things, or some of them. However, everybody needs housing. Housing interventions remove the instability that prolongs homelessness, deepens poverty, and disrupts child development. Stable housing serves as a platform for the delivery of comprehensive services that can clear the path to self-sufficiency. HUD developed the Homelessness Prevention and Rapid Rehousing Program, known as HPRP, to provide financial assistance and services that help prevent individuals and families from becoming homeless and help those who are experiencing homelessness to become quickly rehoused and stabilized. Funds under this program are intended to target individuals and families who would be homeless otherwise but for that assistance. The funds in the CalWORKs HSP program provide a variety of assistance tailored to the individual needs of clients, including short and medium-term rental assistance, housing relocation counseling, security or utility deposits, utility payments, moving costs, and case management services. I'm extremely proud that we've partnered closely with CWDA and the Department of Social Services during HSP's initial year. This program embodies how housing solutions that are flexible and individually tailored to the needs of a family can enhance the outcomes and efficacy of social service programs such as CalWorks, which are designed to improve the lives of children in poverty. I'm proud to say that Mr. Mecca is no longer just a human services worker, he is now a houser. Together we are all partners in the fight to end child poverty. Last week, you heard at the joint Senate hearing on CalWorks from a woman named Michelle. Michelle is a recipient of the CalWorks Housing Support Program funds in Yolo County and has blossomed with that assistance, finding employment, having children attain better grades and academic outcomes in schools, and having a better sense of self-worth. As someone who spent my life as a housing advocate and working with people who are homeless, it brings a good sense of pride to my work to know that we are at a place where we can break down silos and move forward to end poverty in a comprehensive and holistic manner that treats people and meets them where they are. So for this, we would ask that you strongly consider our augmentation request of $30 million for this program when you consider the budget this year, as it will help an estimated additional 10,000 families in CalWorks who are experiencing homelessness and their children. Thank you.
And those of us who heard Michelle's testimony, I've quoted her any number of times, will never forget her compelling story. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Any questions, Senator Monti? No. Any public comment? Yes, sir.
Yes, Madam Chair, Mike Carroll with the Western Center on Law and Poverty, and I'm a recovering housing advocate. And for those in recovery, you're never completely over it. So I stand here today to also support this augmentation. This committee in the past has heard about the impacts of toxic stress from poverty on children. And I would suggest to you that there's probably no more powerful form of toxic stress than homelessness for a small child. And for this reason and all the other reasons stated by your two witnesses, we strongly support this augmentation.
Thank you.
Martha Guerrero representing the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors, and we are also in strong support of this housing support program. This is going to significantly help our 16,000 families, which is in desperate need of this resource. Thank you.
Thank you. Next witness.
Nicole Wertelman on behalf of the Alameda County Board of Supervisors and Ventura County Board of Supervisors, also in support of the expansion of the housing support program. It has helped to house many of our families already, and the expansion is much needed.
I have one question. This proposal would serve an additional 10,000 children, approximately about 4,500 families. Just, humor me. What would the budget amount be necessary to fund all those that Mr. Mecca talked about who are moving into the homeless category every month in the state of California?
It's hard to know for sure, and I don't mean to be evasive. When in this first year, 42 counties applied, and those 42 counties applied for about $54 million. 20 was appropriated. So we know for sure there's 34 million, but we also know for some counties who didn't have an existing infrastructure, they knew that they had to develop that infrastructure, break down those silos before they would apply. And so it would be north of that 30. I don't expect it would be multiples of that number, but we'll know a lot more, as we have the experience.
Senator Monti.
Thank you. Mr. Mecca, you opened with a statistic of 188% increase in homelessness, but I didn't catch from what date.
It was from 2006 to today. And it's basically the Los Angeles County data, and it's probably fairly representative of the state. The interesting thing about that, the sad thing about that number is that starting with the economic recovery, the rate of the increase in homelessness has not abated. So while economic prospects for some people are improving, they're not as quickly for our welfare recipients. And with rents skyrocketing so much faster than wages, I guess it should stand to reason that this problem is going to continue until we can find some creative interventions to be able to intervene quickly.
If I could add one thing to that, the national statistics on homelessness have actually declined as they relate to chronic individual homelessness, but at the same time, family and child homelessness has been on the rise, and that's largely a reflection of people who went through the foreclosure crisis, lost employment, medical coverage, other things in the past 5 to 7 years. And so it's been an interestingly changed dynamic in the homeless services world because who we traditionally assisted, we have actually implemented some good solutions for them, but now we are facing a different face of homelessness every day, which is children and families.
Which is very clear, because one drive down Skid Row in Los Angeles city proper now, and you see the new face of homeless with the number of women and children that are there. We had public comment already. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Both. And again, these are all proposals for investment that the committee will hold open. And if the department has any interest in responding to any of these proposals at their conclusion, you can give me the sign and we'll have you come up. California Partnership to End Domestic Violence. Krista, you'll have to help me with your last name.
Good afternoon, it's Nimzik.
Nimzik, I actually had it right in my head.
No, it's much easier to say than it is to spell.
Right, exactly.
Confuses
Thank you, Ms.
everybody.
Nimzik.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairwoman and Senator Monning, for holding this hearing and for hearing the issue of CalWORK's domestic violence waivers. You know, just to start building on the panel you just heard around housing and homelessness, we know that 22 to 57% of homeless women report domestic violence as an immediate cause of their homelessness, and we know these issues are very interrelated. CalWORKs can often be the bridge that helps these families as they are trying to escape domestic violence. When a survivor and her children are leaving an abusive relationship and are working to find safety and rebuild their lives, CalWORKs can be that safety net, which is its intention, to keep them safe and give them the ability to meet those very basic needs. And I know you've heard much testimony about the CalWORKs program itself. But unfortunately, the domestic violence waivers that are part of CalWORKs have been leaving out far too many survivors. Just as a bit of history, through the federal TANF program, there is a family violence option, which is a waiver for program requirements, recognizing that survivors of abuse often face barriers to meeting the requirements of the program. Survivors often have to relocate for their safety. They've moved out of the area where they have their own internal social safety net. They've moved away from family, away from loved ones because they are fleeing abuse. They've had to leave a job. They've had to relocate their children into new schools. And they're also healing from both physical and emotional trauma, both themselves and their children. So the family violence option has existed as long as we've had TANF in this country, and California has adopted it. However, the way that the waiver process is currently being implemented leaves out a number of survivors. So the waivers are limited to those who are eligible for but are not participating in a welfare to work activity. So it leaves out, for example, undocumented immigrant parents who have eligible children. It leaves out people with disabilities. It leaves out a number of domestic violence survivors. And so there are a number of counties that have not issued domestic violence waivers according to recent reports, although we know that domestic violence survivors are a significant portion of the CalWORKs caseload. We also know that currently there's not a standard required form for notifying applicants to CalWORKs about the waivers. So as survivors are applying for CalWORKs, they may not know that this is something they should disclose to their caseworker. They also are meeting a caseworker for the first time and may not feel comfortable bringing forward their story. You know, Ms. Sawyer, who was here on the MFG panel, is incredibly brave and strong to come forward.
She is.
And not every survivor is willing to do that in any setting or every setting, let alone a CalWORKs interview when you're trying to, you know, get your plan established. So there's necessarily no notice, necessarily not a way for survivors to be able to disclose at a future date Counties also aren't required to waive programs. They're encouraged. It's permissive language. And so all of these set up pretty drastic barriers for survivors in an uneven playing field across the state. And we know there are cases where it works well and women are able to leave poverty and leave that behind, but we know that's not the case throughout the state. And so that's why I wanted to make sure we brought this forward for your consideration.
And thank you for bringing it forward. Just a quick follow-up on a statement you just made, that because it's permissive and not required, and then you follow that up by saying that there are counties where you know it works well. Do you have experience, are there instances, be it anecdotal, where because it's permissive, where you know that people have not received services that we believe should have, but would have if it were mandatory?
We do know that, we hear that anecdotally. So we at the partnership represent organizations all across the state of California. And so we hear from, organizations serving in Los Angeles and in Santa Clara County and in Humboldt County and everywhere throughout the state. And so we have heard from many communities that tell us that CalWORKs waivers really aren't available to their clients or are not available without an extensive amount of advocate work. And that comes working with an advocate at a domestic violence program who knows this program inside and out. And not every domestic violence survivor does that or, is seeking services through a program, or unfortunately, programs are sometimes full and not taking in new clients. So we do hear about the uneven application of this.
I think Ms. Sawyer said in her testimony that, when she needed help and she called and places were full and she wasn't able to access it.
Yeah.
Very true.
Just
Any
something we'll
questions,
talk.
Senator Monty? Any public comment on this proposal?
Rebecca Gonzalez, National Association of Social Workers, California chapter. Every issue we have heard today has been so worthy and so in need of our funds. But I do think that this population really deserves to have different rules, and they do have very unique needs, and they need these services. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as reflected in our agenda, page 30, that a writ of mandate and complaint for declaratory relief in Alameda County has been filed against the department. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We'll move on to our last agenda item for today's marathon hearing on its additional CalWORKs proposals. Mr. Harold, can you hit each proposal with about a minute? Yes, per proposal.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Senator Monty, and I know it has been a long hearing. I feel like I can't believe it was today that I was up here earlier at this, but it was, wasn't it? Mike Carroll with the Western Center on Law and Poverty. I want to touch on, very briefly, several issues that I just want to make sure that's on the agenda of this committee going forward, as we did with the Assembly. One is, I really appreciate the focus by this committee and the legislature on the issues around deep poverty, and the chair's commitment in particular to trying to get to the bottom of this and end deep poverty for children in California. It's absolutely critical that we do that. I applaud your leadership on the maximum family grant issue. And in our view, the next big issue area that has to be addressed is the issue of sanctions within the CalWORKs program. It does exactly the same thing to poor families as the MFG rule did, or the drug felon rule has done, that we're happy it's about to be repealed. But over the last half a dozen years, we've seen the sanction rate go up consistently. It's now perhaps begun to flatten out and not go up, but we have almost 60,000 people being sanctioned, families being sanctioned every month in the CalWORKs program right now. I heard Mr. Bland's testimony earlier about the impact of the 24-month clock, and the lesson, I guess, that I draw from the chart that he gave to you is that in the 14-15 budget year, we will see about 1,300 people go into the TANF clock who will hit 24 months and go into the TANF clock, and the department estimates that of those 1,300, 1,000 of them will be in noncompliance and will get a sanction. That's a sanction rate of 76.9% according to my calculation. I believe that's correct. I'm very bad at math, however. Now, that number actually balloons out in the 15-16 budget year, where we really see the full impact of the 24-month clock happen, in which we'll see some 17,600 people go into the TANF clock, and 13,500 of them will be in noncompliance, a sanction rate of 78.9 according to my math. This is nearly a 75 to 80% sanction rate for folks in this program. I am certain that when this was passed in 2012, that members who voted for this did not believe that that was going to be the occurrence in that second 24-month clock. We just think this can't be the policy of the state of California, that such a high percentage of people would fail and go into noncompliance. So we have two requests. Given the very small numbers of people who will be impacted by the 24-month clock change in the 14-15 budget, only 1,300 people according to DSS. Budget-wise, it's a relatively insignificant impact. For those families, it's a huge impact if they're 80% sanctioned. We would recommend that this body suspend those transfers during the 14-15 budget year and direct the department to form a work group with the legislature, with the counties, with advocates and clients, and try to figure out a different way to do this that doesn't result in a sanction rate that's so high. And bring those efforts back, bring back a set of recommendations to next year's budget that we can all look at and try to adopt and then implement perhaps by January 1 of 2017. We just don't think this can be the outcome that we were all seeking when we were hoping to get more flexibility in the clock, that the folks going into the TANF program would have such an extraordinarily high sanction rate. So we want to cut this off at the pass and not have more people falling into deep poverty, and we bring this request to you in that sense. And then lastly.
Can I ask you a question right quick on sanctions?
Yes, ma'am.
Just given the nature of the organization you work for and its orientation, is there, from your perspective, any sanction level that's acceptable? I mean, are there families and situations where sanctions are warranted and we should have an appetite for a sanction level?
You know, my personal belief, and I believe our organizational's belief, is that these were born out of a so-called reform back some 20 years ago that had a perception that poor families needed a push in order to go to work, that there was something not quite happening there that was encouraging them to go to work.
They needed a stick.
A stick. But I've yet to meet this client who needs that stick. In fact, every witness that you see come before you, I believe, is very clear on their motivation to get out of poverty and get a job and get education. We think that the sanctions largely perform no useful benefit. The only thing that we can guarantee they do in almost every situation is they drive the family into more abject poverty and chaos within their lives. We don't think that we think that the legislature could consider other alternatives to sanctions. The federal law, unfortunately, requires some form of a sanction, but we don't think that it requires such a deep penalty. We could consider a smaller penalty.
Where you could lose aid for the adult in the house.
Right. We could consider one that didn't go into effect for, say, 3 months of noncompliance before a sanction occurred. So there are options that I think that this body could consider, and that may be part of a discussion that could be had over the next several months. We very much believe that the policy, we don't see the evidence that it serves a purpose of helping families escape poverty. And may I correct my record? I misspoke earlier. I used the wrong data numbers for the sanction policy for the 24-month clock. Actually, in the 16-17 budget year, there'll be 9,800 families who will go into the TANF clock, and 7,900 of them will be sanctioned. That's an 80.6% sanction rate, and I apologize to the department. I just read the wrong line of information and trying to rush through this quickly. So yes, I think if I can move on to sort of my final point here today, or two. We also fully support restoring all grants to above 50% of the federal poverty level to have no family in California living in deep poverty. And we would also support the action that, or the consideration of the restoration of the cost of living adjustment, which, like the SSP COLA, was eliminated in the 2009-10 Budget Act. And we would urge this body to restore that so that the legislature can consider the adequacy of CalWORKs grants on an annual basis again. And then finally, and this came before you last year, the earned income disregard is one of the most effective policies that we have. It allows people to keep the first $225 a month that they earn. I think it's probably, at least in my knowledge, the single best thing we did in welfare reform to encourage people to get work and to get out of poverty. But we have not increased it 1 penny since 1997. And because of that, the value of that work incentive has diminished substantially. I'm going to try to get this right. The California budget, I knew I'd mess it up.
We know. The organization formerly known as the California Budget Project.
Chris Haney's going to smack my hand. The project's, the center, is estimates that to get the value back, we'd have to take it up to $344 a month. We would urge the committee to consider doing that in this year's budget, and like the grants, then index it to the CNI, the California Necessities Index, so that it never atrophies in future years. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, sir. Senator Monning, any questions?
Offer my thanks. This is very helpful.
Any public comment on the proposals? And then the department, you want to make some comments? Come on, you come on up to the table now.
Madam Chair, Frank Meck on behalf of the County Welfare Directors Association. Fighting poverty is our #1 priority, and Mr. Harold makes a strong case, and we're in support of many of the proposals on the table.
Thank
Look
you
forward
very
to working with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. What policy would you like to address?
Actually, if I may, I'll try to be.
Senator Monning wanted to know what policy would you like to fund, but I won't ask you that question.
Well, we have a proposal on the table in that regard. In the same vein that Mr. Mecca just made his comment, I'd like to make one as well. Obviously, the Department of Social Services, it's our goal to help people meet their basic needs of daily living and get them into self-sufficiency. There are a variety of things that have been done in past years. There are a variety of things that we are working hard to implement today. There are a variety of things that we've committed to do, like the IHSS restoration that we've talked about today. We very much empathize with the chair's opening remarks about the needs to address poverty, particularly for children. We're interested in having those conversations. Obviously, there is a laundry list of need, and resources continue to be finite in any vision of the world. And in the generation of choices about how to spend available resources, we're happy to engage with that. We would also encourage that we not attack the problems that we face in a piecemeal approach. Mr. Harold earlier today used the term the toxic indicators of family stress and poverty and the lack of housing, and all of those things are contributors. They're also contributors to child abuse and other things that lead to involvement in the child welfare system. So we would encourage that whatever we do in consideration of the budget be done in a thoughtful manner that understands how the various pieces fit together. So I very much appreciate all the issues that the committee plowed through today. It's meaty stuff, important stuff, and happy to be part of the conversation. Thank you.
Fair enough, and we're very happy and appreciate the department, LAO, Finance, for being a part, as well as all of the members of the public, the advocates and program beneficiaries who participated. Any final comments, Senator Monning?
I'll just add my thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Sub 3 stands adjourned.